Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Financial Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of The Gold Warriors by, Sterling and Peggy Seagrave. And the subtitle is called America's Secret Recovery of Yamashita's Gold. So this book was inspired by, I guess you can call it current events in the financial industry. um, in particular about precious metals. And so I thought it would be an interesting read to read about the history of gold and a lot of the behind the scenes, untold stories, unknown stories about the precious metal world. So that's how this book came about. So if you like what we do here, please do consider checking out our other book clubs. We have spiritual book clubs on on Mondays, every Monday, and then health book clubs on Wednesdays. And then we put all the books that we've read in the past on YouTube. So please do check out our YouTube channel and like and subscribe and all that good stuff. We have other contents on there as well, such as podcasts and Akashic Records reading. So please do check them out. And we have all the books that we've read on a playlist. So you guys can just download it and then listen to them when you're, stuck in traffic or walking your dog or something like that. If you have a book that you would like to recommend for us to read, I will leave a link in the description box below. It could be a spiritual book, it could be a health book, it could be a financial book. We love to hear from you. We love to read and we love to consider it. And then if you can, please do consider checking out or signing up for our free monthly newsletter as well. And if you want to support us further, you can buy me a coffee, leave a donation. Check out our merch section on the shop tab on our website. We have many different merchandises, uh, daily wears, daily, stuff that you use for your fur babies, for your cats and dogs, as well as for humans. And we're always updating our designs and putting out new designs. So please do come back often and check them out. And lastly, if you are in the Los Angeles area or if you're visiting LA, please do check out our healing center. We have a healing center that we use technologies based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research for holistic healing for both animals, cats and dogs, and humans. So you can read all about that technology on our website, as well as our other services that we provide as well. So I'll leave all those links in the description box below, and you guys can check them all out at your leisure. But most importantly, we appreciate you being here and supporting us by listening to our book clubs and commenting and supporting us in whatever way, shape, or form that you can. We appreciate it very, very much. So this is chapter two. We'll be reading chapter two, and this will be part two. Now, the author has a lot of endnotes at the end of the book. So what I'll do is I'll read about a page or so in the chapter, and then I will flip to the back and read the endnotes. So that's kind of like our format. Okay, so if you have a book, you can follow with us there. If not, you can follow with us here on camera. Oops. Let me see if I can find my place from last time here. Okay. And this book kind of reads like a Hollywood movie, which is very interesting. Anyways, okay. All right, here we go. Manchukuo became a Japanese army dictatorship fronted by the figurehead Puyi, the last Manchu emperor of China, rescued from evil warlords in Peking. Spirited out of Peking by Colonel Dohara Kenji, Puyi was kept temporarily in luxurious headquarters at the Japanese concession in the port of Tientsin. Doihara was one of Japan's top secret agents. He posed as mayor of Mungden in Manchuria, but was actually director of military intelligence for the whole region. He read widely, including the works of T.E. Lawrence, so he was called the Lawrence of Manchuria. Unlike Lawrence, Dohara was overweight and deceptively mild-looking. He knew where all the bodies were buried, having put many there himself. When he first offered to make Puyi an emperor again, the young man hesitated. With plenty of money and amusement, why should Puyi involve himself in tedious ritual and protocol? Dohara insisted. To make his point, he sent Puyi a basket of fruit containing an unexploded bomb. Once in the palace at Changchun, Puyi and Empress Elizabeth were supplied with heroin by Dohara and watched over by his sidekick, Major Tanaka Takayoshi. Here was another old China hand, a great bull of a man who had spent 2 decades running covert operations in Shanghai. Tanaka saw to it that Empress Elizabeth was sexually exhausted by the attentions of a 24-year-old Manchu princess called Eastern Jewel, a daughter of Prince Su, who had served the rising sun with both men and women since her late teens. Rounding out the group was Colonel Itagaki Seishiro, a bon vivant who later became Japan's war minister. Their counterpart as chief of the military secret police in Manchukuo was Colonel Tojo Hideki, later to be Japan's wartime prime minister. In 1932 to 1936, this quarter of Dohara, Tanaka, this quartet of Dohara, Tanaka, Itagaki, and Tojo ran all black operations in Manchukuo, including kidnapping, extortion, and murder. Boy, not much has changed over the years, isn't it? History is still pretty much the same. On his enthronement, Puyi was congratulated by Hirohito, who sent his brother Prince Chichibu to the coronation. Congratulations also came from Chang Yu-ching, one of Shanghai's underworld bosses. In June 1935, Puyi flew to Tokyo, where Hirohito held a banquet in his honor. Puyi responded by helping Japan plunder northeast China. Before he was kicked out of the Forbidden City, Puyi had removed a hoard of imperial treasure. He later admitted to taking, quote, the most valuable pictures, calligraphy, and antiques in the imperial collections out of the palace by pretending that I was giving them to my brother Puchi, end quote. These included imperial seals of the Emperor Qianlong and thousands of manuscripts, scrolls, and paintings. He said, quote, Puyi also used to take a large bundle home after school every day for over 6 months. And the things we took were the very finest treasures in the collections. As it happened, the heads of the household department and my tutors were checking through the pictures and the calligraphy at the time, so all we had to do was to take the items they selected as being of the very highest grade. In addition to paintings and calligraphy, we also took many valuable ancient editions of books. We must have removed over 1,000 hand scrolls, more than 200 hanging scrolls, and pages from albums, and about 200 rare Song Dynasty printed books, end quote. These were removed to Manchuria and stored on a palace compound in a small white building behind the Hall of Harmony and Virtue. Later, Puyi said, quote, when it was becoming increasingly obvious that Japan was losing the war, I spontaneously gave a lot of gold, silver, and jewelry to the Kwangtung army. I presented them with the carpets from the palace floors and hundreds of items of clothing. All these actions of mine were widely publicized and made the task of looting easier for the Japanese officials, end quote. When the puppet kingdom of Manchukuo collapsed in August 1945, all these treasures had vanished, shipped to Japan long in advance of the surrender. Okay, so let's look at the endnotes in the back. Let's see, that would be page 28. Okay. All right. So the note about the basket of fruit and the unexploded bomb. C. Brackman, The Other Nuremberg, page 155. The note about Puyi's drug addiction. Harry's and Harry's, Soldiers of the Sun, page 245. Puyi also describes his need for, quote, medicine and, quote, injections, though never describing this as heroin. You can find that in Puyi from Emperor to Citizen. The note about Puyi receiving messages of congratulations from the underworld bosses of Shanghai. You can find that in Puyi from Emperor to Citizen, Volume 2, page 276. A secret Guangdong army document said, quote, officials of the Manchukuoan lineage shall outwardly assume charge. Officials of Japanese lineage must control its substance, end quote. Guangdong Army Directive establishing the principles for Puyi's reign. You can find that in Brackman, The Other Nuremberg, page 156. The note about Puyi's description of how he and Puqi removed treasures from the Forbidden City. You can find that in Puyi from Emperor to Citizen, Volume 1, page 129. The note about small white building and details of the storage of the objects in Changchun is from Chinese-art.com. Zhang Xin's 10 Odes and Puyi's Legacy at Chinese-art.com. The note about I spontaneously gave Puyi's donations to the army. You can find that in From Emperor to Citizens, Volume 2, page 303. Objects described by Puyi started showing up in Christie's and Sotheby's in 1991. Disappearance of the treasures after the surrender. See Puyi From Emperor to Citizen, Volume 1, page 129. Okay. All right, continuing our reading in the chapter. Once Puyi was enthroned, the Guangdong Army launched its hugely expensive attempt to industrialize Manchuria overnight as a model of central-controlled state capitalism. To justify the cost, Manchuria was promoted as the solution to all Japan's problems. Its agricultural potential, mineral wealth, industry, and cheap Chinese labor would boom overnight, providing Japan with a broad range of industrial and consumer goods. Bright young economic planners rushed to Manchuria under the control of one relative. Skipped a line there. Bright young economic planners rushed to Manchuria to perform magic, foremost among them Kishi Nobuzuki. He put Montetsu under the control of one relative and put Manchuria's economy in the hands of another, who headed the Nissan Zaibatsu. Kishi's circle was called the Nikki San Suke clique, the 2-ki, 3-suke clique. The 2-ki were men whose names ended in ki. General Tojo Hideki, now the Guangdong Army Chief of Staff, and the opium monopoly boss Hoshino Naoki, who later became Emperor Hirohito's chief cabinet secretary. The three others were economists: Kishi Nobuzuke, Mansetsu president Matsuoka Yosuke, and Nissan boss Aikawa Gizuke, whose names ended in suke. They controlled everything in Manchuria through a mega corporation called Manchurian Heavy Industries. Nissan provided the brains. Tojo supplied the muscle. They spent recklessly. Between 1932 and 1938, 48 Manchurian cities were laid out with running water, sewer systems, flush toilets, electricity, gas, telegraph, roads, railway, and military facilities. Japanese government funds poured in. Financiers in Osaka and Tokyo had serious doubts, but they feared being murdered if they did not support the army. What was not borrowed from banks was stolen. The Guangdong Army had deep pockets. because it looted all the banks in Manchuria. The day after Colonel Ishihara staged his bogus Manchurian incident in September 1931, the Kwangtung Army advanced into Mukden and seized all the assets of the Frontier Bank and the Bank of the three eastern provinces and their administrative records. While soldiers sealed the borders, Tojo's Kapitai stormed all branches of the Kirin Provincial Bank and the Heilongjiang Provincial Bank. All these banks were Chinese owned and operated. The assets were used to set up the central bank of Manchukuo, which printed its own occupation scrip, posing as a new national currency. Everyone was ordered to exchange Chinese money from this scrip. The Choson Bank of Korea, a Japanese bank based in Korea, established 20 branches in Manchuria to help carry out this vandalism. Its New York office hustled American loans for the development of Manchuria, which were never repaid. Another source of easy money was extortion. Simon Casby, son of a Jewish hotel and theater owner in Harpen, was kidnapped in 1933. When a ransom note arrived demanding $100,000, his father refused to pay. Although Japanese police, quote, cooperated in searching for the boy, many in the Jewish community suspected that the Kapatai was involved in the kidnapping. On December 3rd, Simon Casby's body was found. He had been beaten, starved, tortured, mutilated, and kept in an underground pit before he was finally shot. The extreme brutality was taken as evidence that it was done by Tojo's Kempeitai or its Black Dragon or Black Ocean allies. At his funeral, mourners shouted, "Down with the Kempeitai! Down with the Imperial Japanese Army!" Police arrested some alleged kidnappers. They were tried, then released. Outraged but frightened, the Jewish community in Manchuria began crossing the border to settle in what they hoped would be more peaceful circumstances in China. Okay, so let's read the end notes in the back. Let's see here. Okay. So the note about Manchurian experiment. Manchurian incident gave the army increased influence over Tokyo. You could find that in Young, Japan's Total Empire, page 115. Condensha, Encyclopedia of Japan, volume 2, page 126. The note about Nikki Sansoke clique, you can find that in Roberts, Mitsui, page 312. The note about 48 new critics, 48 new cities, you could find that in Young, Japan's Total Empire, page 245. The note about sequestration of banks, you can find that in Yoshimasa. The monetary policy in the Netherlands, East Indies, under the Japanese administration, in Post and Toen Bosma editors, Japan, Indonesia, and the War, page 181. The note about Kwangtung Army sequestered funds to start the Central Bank of Manchukuo. See Yasutani, Money and Finance in Manchuria, 1895 to 1945. School of Information and Science, Nagoya University, Nagoya, Japan, online. The note about Bank of Chosen, Cummings, Parallax Visions, page 76. And the note about Simon Casby, Kidnapping and Murder, Lamont Brown, Kempeitai, page 79 to 80. Wow. Okay. That's pretty brutal world, isn't it? Sounds like the cartel. Sounds like what's happening right now in Mexico, current events. Okay, continuing. Bank robberies, currency fraud, and extortion could be done only once or twice before the victims were exhausted. Steadier cash flow came from narcotics, which became Manchukuo's chief products. Accounts of the Manchurian experiment avoided this dark side. In fact, Japan as a whole became deeply involved in Manchurian opium, heroin, and morphine production. In 1911, the region had produced less than 2,500 kilos of opium. 15 years later, annual production of annual production on Mantetsu territory and huge farms taken over by the Japanese underworld rose to 36,000 kilos. Wow. After Japan seized all of Manchuria in 1932, tens of thousands of hectares were put under poppy production, and dozens of laboratories were built to convert opium tar into various grades of morphine and heroin. Under production of the Kwangtung Army, drug traffickers in Manchuria spread their distribution across the Great Wall, down into north and central China. The Central Bank of Manchukuo built up major reserves from profits generated by the army drug monopoly. Pharmaceutical factories flooded China with heroin tablets to soften it up for invasion. The opium monopoly was directed by Hoshino Naoki, one of the ruling Nikki Sansuke clique, a former tax official who managed all Manchukuo's financial affairs. Thus, the economy of Japanese Manchuria was inextricably bound to hard drugs. Later, when Naoki was promoted to become Emperor Hirohito's chief cabinet secretary, a direct link was established between the emperor and Japan's massive drug trade. Given this link, it would be hard to believe that Hirohito was ignorant of Japan's profiteering in narcotics. In 1934, the Opium Advisory Commission in Geneva accused Japan of operating the world's largest single venture in illicit drugs. Japan gave farmers in Manchuria cash incentives to take up poppy cultivation. It was Mitsui itself, Japan's oldest sabatsu, today one of the world's richest conglomerates, that processed the opium into morphine and heroin. The opium monopoly actively encouraged addiction, hooking new users by distributing free medicines spiked with morphine and free cigarettes trademarked Golden Bat, laced with heroin. This drug trade grew quickly into a major source of income for the Kwangtung Army, estimated to have been as much as $300 million a year, $3 billion in today's value. Hoshino was able to use heroin futures as collateral for bank loans. Both the Kempeitai and Special Section 8 of the Imperial Intelligence Division operated narcotics dens. By 1937, 90% of the world's illicit opium and morphine were of Japanese origin. The Manchurian experiment had changed from a fantasy to a pipe dream. Wow, that is incredible. Okay, let's read some of the endnotes in the back there. What page was that? Page 30. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so the note about opium production in Manchuria, 1911 and 1926, you can find that in Wakeman Policing, page 272. The note about Hoshino and the Opium Monopoly Bureau, you can find that in Roberts, Mitsui, page 311 to 313. The note about the Manchukuo opium monopoly, the world's largest single venture in illicit drugs. You can find that in Wakeman Policing, page 272. The note about narcotics dens operated by Kempeitai and Special Section 8, Harry's and Harry, Soldiers of the Sun, page 244. The note about 90% of the world's illicit opium and morphine of Japanese origin, Harry's and Harry's, Soldiers, page 248. Oh, very interesting, eh? Okay. All right. Manchuria also became the main proving ground for Japan's biological warfare program, simply Unit 731. Headquartered in Pingfan outside Harbin, it was headed by Colonel Ishishiro, a 1920 graduate of Kyoto University, who persuaded the high command to let him develop chemical and biological weapons and test them on Chinese in Manchuria. Puyi said he learned that his subjects were being enslaved by the Japanese to build these installations, then were poisoned to keep the location secret. Later, during the Pacific War, other labs were set up in Peking, Canton, and Singapore, experimenting in Allied POWs and civilian prisoners. Emperor Hirohito was briefed about it in detail during at least one recorded meeting with Colonel Ishii. The emperor's brothers toured Pingfan to observe experiments. Prince Mikasa, Hirohito's youngest brother, revealed after the war that he had seen films in which, quote, large numbers of large numbers of Chinese prisoners of war were made to march on the Manchurian plain for poison gas experiments on live subjects, end quote. Others, he said, were, quote, tied to posts in a wide field and gassed and shot. It was a horrible scene that could only be termed a massacre, end quote. Narcotics aside, by 1936, Manchuria's boom was acknowledged to be an expensive failure. Its products were inferior, consumer goods were in short supply, not enough coal or other material was available to supply the needs of its private industry. The system of economic controls invented by Kishi was a botch, dragging down Japan's home economy as well. The child was cannibalizing its parent. Even so, fortunes were made in sweetheart deals cooked by Kishi, who arranged unsecured loans at zero interest. In exchange for these loans, kickbacks were paid to Kishi, other members of his clique, and the Kwangtung Army brass. There are many ways to plunder a country. What happened in Manchuria was different from what had happened in Korea. But the end result was the same. Like any binge, it did not last long. From the seizure of all of Manchuria in 1932 to recognition of the army's failure in 1936, only 4 years passed. For the victims, time passed differently. The Kwangtung Army was stoned on its success with narcotics. Some officers recognized that the wealth generated by drugs and by the looting of Korea and Manchuria was artificial, the result of armed robbery. But that's what they did for a living. While there was more to be stolen, why stop? Planners said the Manchurian experiment could yet be made to work if the army seized control of China, putting Japan in monopoly control of that vast consumer market. If utopia did not work in Manchuria, it would work in China. And if it did not work in China, well, there was still Southeast Asia, India, and Australia. The army was impatient, with so many careers at stake and so many young officers moving up the ranks, hoping to share the glory. Stopping was out of the question. Everyone looked longingly at the quote unopened treasure house just across the Great Wall to the south. And this is end of chapter 2. So let's read the rest of the endnotes for this chapter, and we will call it a day. Let's see here. Okay. All right. So the note about Puyi learned about Unit 731 installations. You can find that in Puyi, Emperor to Citizen, Volume 2, page 289. The note about tied to posts. Prince Mikasa reported Japanese army atrocities during the Pacific War, but his report was kept secret and only found in 1994. The Times of London on July 7, 1994. In point of fact, we found a story in the New York Times in 1951 in which Prince Mikasa had expressed his dismay over the army conduct in the field. The note about Manchuria as an expensive failure, you can find that in Young, Japan's Total Empire, page 218 and 235. And then the note about unopened treasure house. You can find that in Young, Japan's Total Empire, page 229 and 230, note 104. Wow, what a brutal world they live in. I guess not much has changed. We kind of live in a brutal world today, but we just don't talk about it or hear about it much, huh? I think these are important to know, to be aware, so it doesn't happen again. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I don't know. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments. I'd love to hear from you and hear and uh I'd love to hear from you and know what you think about this book and what we read and about its history. Anyways, okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and we will see you next time in the next book club. Okay, bye-bye now.